A story on politicalmayhem.news by Susan Thomas, June 7, 2017. Links to the article and blog are in the description below. Antifa organizer runs off and marries Muslim man. Begs to come home after receiving this brutal wedding gift. If you haven't heard of Lacy MacAuley, she is a left-wing Antifa organizer who promotes riots across the country. She was also featured in Project Veritas' undercover video exposing her as one of the morons behind the violent protests during Trump's inauguration. Like most left-wingers, she crusaded for Muslim rights in America and even helped the terrorist scum get in the country, under the guise of refugees, of course. She was determined to prove that Islam is a peaceful, loving religion. Then she met a Muslim man and fell in love with him. That's when things took a turn. She moved to Turkey to be with her new lover and quickly realized that her views on the so-called religion of peace couldn't be farther from the truth. Over time, she was exposed to the brutal reality of their way of life and realized she was wrong. She wrote a blog explaining how horrible it was to live under Sharia law and the brutal ways she was treated. Here's a few snippets from Lacy, the Muslim lover's blog. It's quite interesting to see her open her eyes to the true meaning of Islam.
My experience of intimate partner violence, trapped in Turkey. Maybe I reached too high, and had too far to fall. It has been 2 months since my return to the US. Intimate partner violence, or domestic abuse, was something I never imagined that I would stumble into. But misogyny and patriarchy run deep, especially in Turkey, and I found myself in a bad situation. I am a radical activist based in Washington, D.C. I fell in love with an energetic, charismatic activist I met in November when I was present to write about resistance to the G20 summit, a global event in Antalya, Turkey. After I came home to the US, we talked every day. He was lovely and charming, I thought at the time. He offered a ready smile, engaging kindness, and intelligent conversation. He said all the right things to convince me that he cared about women's rights and activism. In February, I decided to return to Turkey with the promise of love driving me forward. I couldn't have known things would turn sour. I thought that even if this were not going to develop into a deeper relationship, it would be an opportunity to learn more about this Muslim country during an interesting political moment, and I could do some work around refugees. I also thought, hey, at least I would probably make a dear friend. The first 2 weeks were quite the love story. I observed that he was drinking heavily, and called him an alkie, but it was just a joke at first. We went to the beach and historic sites, and he introduced me to his friends. All seemed to be going well, and I felt that the romance was solidly moving forward. Then came our first fight. I had wanted to interview a local woman for an article on Syrian refugees. He did not approve. He knew the woman and did not like her, so he strictly forbade me from speaking with her. After I questioned his rationale, he yelled and stormed out of the room to go smoke a cigarette. I just stood in the middle of the room not knowing what to do. Of course, as a Western woman, no one had ever forbidden me from speaking with anyone else. It was a strange feeling. Don't I have a mouth to speak? Why can I not use it as I wish?
MacAuley goes on to discuss her feminist background that would have prevented her from being a Muslim had she known what they truly believed in. But of course this lesson came too late, as she would learn.
This is elementary feminism. No man has the power to silence a woman, just because he is a man. How far backwards things would slide in the coming weeks. What I found over the next few weeks was absolute frustration of my efforts to do my advocacy work. I had put myself in a place of dependence upon a person who, as it turned out, would have liked to keep me by his side and control my every move. He hindered, rather than helped, the work I tried to do there. Things deteriorated rapidly. His insecurity and childishness got worse. In the following weeks, I was violently pushed, blocked from leaving freely, and repeatedly told not to speak. If I spoke anyway, anger erupted. I endured threats that I would be burnt with cigarettes, flinching as he faked with his lit cigarette. I had to duck to avoid having sharp objects thrown at my face. I had water angrily poured over my head. Unwanted sex? Rape? All the time. He did not stop to determine whether I consented to sex. Several times, he turned off my Wi-Fi and lied about it, a modern-day form of gaslighting. He verbally criticized me for using social media, my main link to the rest of my life back in the US, and tried to discourage me from using it. He forced me to unfriend one Turkish man on Facebook, and wanted me to unfriend many more. But I know now not to blame myself. Yes, I had made myself vulnerable, but I couldn't have guessed that this man, who said he cared about women's rights, who spoke of how many activist friends that he had, who had participated in many protests in the past, would turn on me, and that he would become so angry and irrational. 1/3 of men surveyed in Turkey in 2013 stated that it is occasionally necessary to commit acts of violence against women, and 28% stated that violence could be used to discipline women. I did not want to believe that I was in this statistic. I had dreams of him strangling me to death. I was in constant fear of his next angry episode. I had lost respect for him, even as he angrily demanded respect from me in a variety of situations. But I still forgave him, too many times. I honestly think that one of the reasons that I have been silent about this for 2 months has been that I did not want to feed into the narrative of Muslim men being aggressive. I didn't want to fuel hatred or racism. But silence breeds complicity, and I'm now telling this story in order to heal. When I threatened to call the police, he gave me the most evil eye and told me that domestic abuse was not taken seriously in Turkey. He said, accurately, that we would likely both wind up in jail if I did that, and he would simply talk his way out of the situation. After all, I had no bruises or broken bones, and with his silver, forked tongue he could easily talk his way out of the situation. How dare he discuss these injustices now, I thought, injustices that he had learned from his feminist friends, in order to perpetrate his own male violence against me. But I knew that he was right. The physical abuse was accompanied by degrading comments. Like many abusers, his real desire is for control, and he sought that through psychological means first. He said I was disorganized, I was too proud, I was a prostitute for accepting donations for my advocacy work, I was social media addicted, my social media wasn't even very good. I made him wait an extra 5 seconds, not exaggerating, 5 seconds, while downloading the latest US State Department travel advisories, which made him flip out and yell at me for 10 minutes. I had probably had sex with all of the Turkish men who were my Facebook friends. I talked too much, I asked him the wrong questions, etc. etc. How can a radical activist and a feminist find herself in a relationship like this? An abundance of optimism is perhaps my greatest crime. In the end, though I had been dependent upon my abuser in Turkey, I had the privilege of getting on an airplane and leaving. At the end of all of this, I was able to cross the Atlantic Ocean and get away from him forever. Turkish women are not so lucky. Although they experience more freedom than women in other Muslim countries, about 42% of women in Turkey report intimate partner violence. Meanwhile, Turkish officials make unhelpful comments telling women to avoid public laughter and not to be inviting in their behavior, lest they become victims of sexual violence. The health minister and president say that the most important career for a woman is motherhood. This does nothing to improve the status of women in Turkey. It is funny that my family and friends were so worried about terrorism, about bombs or the Islamic State or the Kurdish fighters. And no doubt the various attacks that happened while I was there were also traumatizing. But what my loved ones should have been worried about was the man next to me in my Facebook photographs, with his Cheshire smile. Somehow, I couldn't bring myself to talk about it until now.
Hopefully this message will reach some and have them realize that Sharia law is very real and very dangerous. First, I'd like to comment, to be fair, I don't recall Laci ever mentioning Sharia law in her blog. And Turkey is not now a country with Sharia law. It is moving in that direction, but it is not now. With the long list of claims of patriarchy, misogyny, racism, transphobia, etc. being carelessly thrown around in civilized Western nations that have laws to protect people, millions of people in the world, gays, women, children, non-believers, and apostates, are in constant fear and real danger for their freedom and even lives. I am not saying we are perfect, and there is no room for improvement, but there are places in the world where Sharia law reigns supreme, and the lives of some people are not valued or worth as much as others. Hopefully, stories such as this will become known, for it is not written by some Muslim-hating Islamophobe, but admitted in her own words, a woman who was afraid to tell the story for fear of, quote, I did not want to feed into the narrative of Muslim men being aggressive. I didn't want to fuel hatred or racism, unquote. We are reading the sentiment across countries in civilized Europe over and over again. People and governments do not have the courage to speak out against violence committed by Muslims for fear of being called a racist. Forget the fact that Islam is not a race. They are doing no one any good, and I include peaceful Muslims in this, because they are obviously most often the victim. The story presented here ends well, but not so for millions of women who do not have the luxury of being able to flee from their aggressor to a safe country based on constitutional law, but are condemned to a life of fear and oppression under religious law. So give up this microaggression nonsense and look to the places in the world where real-life aggressions are acted out daily, and to the abused who will never be able to tell their story. Goodbye.